I want to give you a very quick update of what has been happening after Personal Information Protection Law, which was released in 2021. And the Personal Information Protection Law, short for the PIPL, is the umbrella law. And under this umbrella law, there's a set of sub-regulations that released by the Cyberspace Administration of China, which is the main data protection authority. So I will point out some of the key words here, like the security assessment, certification, and standard contract. You'll see actually these are the data protection for the cross-border transferring. These are the 3 routes. And earlier on, Kevin has mentioned about the AI regulation and all this development, right? There's something similar in China because China has a goal by 2030, right? The AI private industry, they're going to have the goal like they need to make $154 billion every year. That is a goal. With this kind of goal, you see the development of AI, especially the generative AI, has caught the attention of the regulators. So they have released the draft regulations for the generative AI. Yeah. Then here, I want to point out some of the key differences as we zoom in, comparing the China's PIPO versus the GDPR. Because driven by the digital economy, then the focus is on the consumer's rights. And especially it is reflected in their lawful basis. In here, you see that the lawful basis, there's some similar to the GDPR, like the contract performance, vital interest, public interest. But that is not the key here. For China, actually, the consent is the norm. Other lawful bases, they're the exceptions, and they do not include the legitimate interest. So for other things, I want to point out is the consent mechanism. There are 2 consent mechanisms for normal personal data and for sensitive person data. For sensitive person data, you will need to get the separate consent. So let's say if you're processing financial data, personal whereabouts, right, this kind of personal information, you will need to get the separate consent. And other parts of the discrepancy I want to highlight is the cross-border data mechanism. You see that the 3 routes, as I just mentioned, the security assessment, certification, and standard contract, especially for the security assessment, this is mandated for those critical information infrastructure operators or the organization reaching the regulated threshold. Let's say if you're processing more than 1 million individuals' person data, then the security assessment is a must. And up to now, only 13 organizations, they got the approval of the security assessment. So as another part of the discrepancy I want to highlight is the accountability part, where you see the foundational internet platform, which is very similar to the gatekeeper rules under the Digital Market Act, right? And in here, China's PIPL pointed out, besides the normal data protection obligations, they also need to regularly release the social responsibility report. So that part, as compared to the GDPR, is kind of unique as well. Then who is going to regulate the data processing activities? As you can see here, it says the Polycentric Data Protection Authority, which means unlike the EU GDPRs, where it's an independent supervisory authority, there are different levels. So on the top, you have the Cyberspace Administration of China, oversees overall planning. Then on the local level, you also have the relevant departments for the specific for the specific regions. You also have the different departments under the state council for the respective industries. So here, I like to add on to the non-compliance part. So you see the number in here, the maximum fine is no more than 15 million Chinese yuan or 5% of their annual turnover, whichever is higher. But enforcement doesn't just stop there. It can be the suspension of business. And if you look at the enforcement trends here, the amount of fine is actually going up from millions to over 10 million Chinese yuan. And you see the Didi's case, which is off the charts, right? 8 billion Chinese yuan. And for them, it's not just the administrative fine. They will delisted from the exchange, and 25 apps were removed more than 100 days. So that's the impact of the non-compliance. So as I just point out some of the key challenges, you see it's very important. You need to understand what is considered as sensitive data, because under the China's PIPO, the sensitive data is actually broader than the GDPR, because in practice, you need to analyze whether the data sets will seriously cause the damage to the individuals. So understanding the different concept of the separate consent is also very important, and understanding which kind of transferring mechanism you're going to choose is also kind of the challenges. And what I just talked about, the data protection authorities in different levels, you can already perceive that there will be inconsistent enforcement, right? So that's very quickly about China. So you see, China's PIPO is not just the adoption, it has incorporated the adaptation to the law, right? Especially for the digital economy, it's all about building the consumer's trust. That's why those regulators, they have enforced this kind of rules to reinforce that if you need to get the consumer's trust, then you will need to prove that you are trustworthy. So now let's move on to another very dynamic country, which is Vietnam. They recently released a new law only on April 17th, and it's already effective. And like many other data protection laws, it covers both the private sector and the public sector. And it also separates the person data into the basic and the sensitive person data. So very quickly, I want to highlight some of the key differences here comparing to the GDPR. You will see that like the Malaysia's law, Thailand's law, and China's law is also consumers' rights first, and consent first, no legitimate interest. And another very important uniqueness in terms of the Vietnam is the person data controller cum processor. Basically, it means that it is the organization that also has the rules of controller and the processor. Now, another part of the Vietnam's decree is the cross-border mechanism, which they have the compulsory transfer impact assessment. You have to, for all the organizations, if they need to transfer the person data outside of Vietnam, they have to report to the AO5, which is the existing agency under the Public Security Ministry. So with this as the key differences, you can see that because it's a new law, so right now it's lacking of the clarity and also to understand those rules under the person data controller, the processor, and also the comprehensive transfer impact assessment. So with this as a very quick summary, so Vietnam's draft decree is also not just a replication, it has the adaptation to their law, and it has the unique provisions about the Vietnam's context.